They whisper it, don't they? Or perhaps they don't even need to. You feel it in the way their eyes slide past yours, the way conversations pause when you approach, then resume on a lighter, simpler note once you're assumed to be out of earshot. Too serious, too intense. You think too much. Why can't you just be normal? You've heard it all in words spoken and unspoken, a litany of labels that try to define you, to simplify what they don't understand. You offer a thought, a carefully considered perspective, and a hush falls. Not always a hush of revelation. Sometimes, it's the uncomfortable silence of minds startled, of paradigms gently nudged, or perhaps of people simply waiting for the strange moment to pass. It's not that you intend to be disruptive. Your observations are not born of malice, but of a clarity that seems to pierce through the common haze. You see the patterns others miss, the subtle threads connecting disparate ideas, the unspoken assumptions underpinning everyday beliefs. You hear the dissonance between words and actions, the tremor of insincerity in a confident voice, the curated personas people present to the world, and you dare to question, not out of arrogance, but from a profound, unyielding curiosity. Why is it this way? What if we looked at it differently? Is this truly what we believe, or just what we've been told to believe? These are not accusations, but invitations. Invitations most seem to decline, and so the distance grows, not always by your choosing, a gradual, almost imperceptible drift. Like tectonic plates, you and the mainstream move apart, the chasm widening with each passing year, each unshared insight, each misunderstood intention. They gather, bonded by a current you cannot feel, laughing at jests that seem hollow, animated by dramas that feel manufactured, chasing fleeting trends that leave you cold. Their world is bright, loud, and fast-moving. Yours is often quiet, deep, and contemplative. While their conversations skim the surface, the latest celebrity gossip, the newest gadget, the ephemeral outrage of the day, your mind is wrestling with echoes from eternity. The nature of existence, the architecture of meaning, the poignant brevity of a human life against the backdrop of cosmic indifference. You try, oh how you try to bridge that gap. You practice the smile, the nod, the carefully constructed appropriate response. You learn the vocabulary of their world, the rituals of belonging. You might even, for a time, convince yourself you're blending in. But then comes the quiet moment, the unguarded reflection, and the truth resurfaces. That feeling, like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe, you observe, you learn, you mimic. But you are not of them. A resident alien, fluent in the local customs, but with a heart that beats to a different cosmic rhythm. And the question, inevitably, forms in the quiet solitude of your own mind, a persistent, aching whisper. Is there something fundamentally broken in me? Am I wired incorrectly for this human experience? Pause. Let that question hang in the air, because it's a question that has haunted the deepest thinkers, the most sensitive souls, for millennia. But consider this just for a moment. What if the perceived flaw is not a flaw at all? What if the problem isn't you, but the narrow confines of a world largely uninterested in the depths you inhabit? What if the societal structures, the cultural norms, the very way we communicate, are simply not designed to accommodate the full spectrum of human consciousness, especially its more probing, more perceptive end? The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, a man who stared unflinchingly into the abyss of human existence, understood this profoundly. He wasn't one for comforting illusions. He posited that true intelligence, the kind that sees beyond the superficial, the kind that questions relentlessly, is an isolating force. The more acutely you perceive, the more expansive your understanding, the more likely you are to find yourself on the fringes. Why? Because the majority, Schopenhauer observed, do not crave raw, unfiltered truth. They seek comfort. They seek validation of their existing beliefs. They seek the reassurance of the familiar. And the truly intelligent individual, with their inconvenient questions and their penetrating insights, inherently threatens that carefully constructed comfort. They are the unwelcome light in a room where most prefer the shadows. This journey we're on, this exploration, is about facing that brutal, often unspoken truth Schopenhauer brought to light. It's about understanding why a society that pays lip service to brilliance often recoils from its most authentic expressions. And it's about considering the challenging possibility that your loneliness, your feeling of being an outsider, might not be a sign of your deficiency, but the most compelling evidence of your mind's rare and profound capacity. It begins subtly, almost imperceptibly. You're a child, in a classroom, on a playground, at a family gathering, surrounded by your peers, yet an invisible film separates you, not a sense of superiority. That's a common misinterpretation, often projected onto you by those who feel unsettled by your difference. No, it's simpler and more profound than that, a feeling of being out of sync, disconnected. While others chase the ball with unbridled, unthinking joy, you might find yourself mesmerized by the intricate dance of sunlight on a leaf, or pondering the unspoken sadness in a teacher's eyes. While they parrot the answers they've been taught, you're already 3 questions ahead, wondering about the assumptions behind the question itself. The laughter around you often feels unearned, automatic, a social reflex, and you wonder, why do people say things they don't truly mean, offering pleasantries that mask indifference or even hostility? Why does the relentless chatter of small talk feel like a barrage of static, obscuring any chance of genuine connection? Why does it so often feel as if you are perched on the edge of life, an observer peering through a one-way mirror, rather than an active participant immersed in its flow? This is the initial bitter taste of what can feel like a silent, lifelong sentence, the burden of an intelligence that is not merely academic. We're not speaking here of high grades, standardized test scores, or the accumulation of degrees, though those may or may not accompany it. We're speaking of a deeper, more intrinsic quality, a way of being, the intelligence that compels you to question everything, especially the things labeled obvious or just the way things are. The intelligence that imbues you with a hyper-awareness, a sensitivity so acute that you feel the emotional undercurrents in a room as palpably as a change in temperature. The kind that relentlessly observes the myriad contradictions in human behavior, the subtle hypocrisies that pepper everyday interactions, the convenient narratives people weave to avoid uncomfortable truths. And because of this, you find it almost physically impossible to just go with the flow, to blindly accept, to switch off that analytical, observational part of your mind. As the years pass, this disconnect doesn't typically lessen. It often sharpens, becomes more defined. Social gatherings can transform from potential opportunities for connection into complex navigation exercises. You begin to curate your words with meticulous care, not out of deceit, but out of a learned weariness. Experience has taught you that unvarnished honesty, especially when it challenges collective illusions, can make people deeply uncomfortable, even hostile. You've learned that asking why one too many times can extinguish the fragile flame of casual conversation, earning you sighs, eye rolls, or the dreaded label of negative. So you develop the art of the partial truth, the edited insight, the diplomatic silence. You nod, you smile, you offer vague affirmations, you pretend, because the alternative, the exhaustive, often futile effort of trying to make yourself truly understood by those who seem to operate on a different wavelength feels like an impossible, energy-draining quest. People frequently mistake your quietness for aloofness, your reserved nature for arrogance. If only they knew. If only they could glimpse the internal landscape. Not a fortress of superiority, but often a sanctuary born of exhaustion. A quiet space where you don't have to constantly translate your thoughts into a more palatable, less challenging dialect. You are not inherently cold or unfeeling. Far from it. You feel things with an intensity that can sometimes be overwhelming. But you have learned, through painful trial and error, that the depth of your feeling, the complexity of your thought, can scare people, can be perceived as too much, too heavy, too demanding. So, you keep your most profound insights locked away like precious, fragile treasures. Your most pressing questions remain unasked, censored by your own internal warden. Your deepest pain, your most acute loneliness, remains largely invisible, a silent hum beneath the surface of your composure. And here we arrive at a central, poignant paradox of our human condition. Society, in the abstract, professes to admire intelligence. It builds monuments to innovators, praises scientific breakthroughs, and celebrates artistic genius, usually long after the geniuses themselves are safely dead and no longer capable of making anyone uncomfortable. We worship the idea of genius. We consume its products. But in the flesh, in our daily lives, the genuinely, rawly intelligent individual often finds themselves not celebrated, but subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, isolated, marginalized, or pressured to conform. Why this glaring discrepancy? Why this societal cognitive dissonance? Because real, untamed intelligence doesn't just solve pre-approved problems within existing frameworks. That's the safe, manageable kind of intellect society often rewards. No, true intelligence, the kind we're discussing, inherently challenges those frameworks. It sees through the comforting illusions. It questions the sacred cows, the unquestioned norms, the emperor's new clothes that everyone else pretends to admire. And that relentless questioning, that refusal to take things at face value, is profoundly unsettling to the status quo and to those who derive their comfort and identity from it. You become, in a sense, too complex for the simplified narratives that govern most surface-level connections. Too analytical to uncritically enjoy simple pleasures without sometimes dissecting their components, their origins, their implications. It's not that you can't enjoy them. It's that your enjoyment is often accompanied by a layer of understanding, of awareness, that others don't share, which can create a subtle distance. Too aware of the undercurrents, the unspoken truths, the potential pitfalls, to ever truly, fully relax into blissful ignorance. Your mind is a finely tuned instrument, always sensing, always processing. And the emotional cost of this state of being, it's invisible to the outside world, yet it can be crushing. You can sit in a room buzzing with laughter and conversation, surrounded by people, and feel an acute, bone-deep loneliness that is almost physical in its intensity. You yearn, with a primal ache, for a connection that transcends the superficial, for a mind that meets yours in that deep, resonant space of shared understanding, for someone who doesn't just hear your words but grasps the intricate tapestry of thought and feeling behind them, someone who isn't intimidated by your depth but is drawn to it, someone who gets you. But that person, that connection, often feels like a mythical creature, perpetually elusive. Or if found, they are rare, scattered lights in a vast darkness. So you retreat. You find solace in books, in nature, in the intricate worlds you build within your own mind. And again, that insidious question creeps back in, perhaps with more force this time. Is there something fundamentally, irreparably wrong with me for needing more, for seeing more, for feeling more? Am I destined to be this cosmic observer, forever on the outside looking in? That right there is the unspoken tragedy. The world we've built, for all its advancements, does not adequately equip its most perceptive minds to navigate this specific type of existential loneliness. It teaches you how to acquire skills, how to achieve conventional success, how to perform your assigned roles. But it offers precious little guidance on how to exist, how to find peace and belonging when your internal wiring is fundamentally different from the prevailing schematic. There are no user manuals for the soul that feels too much, for the mind that thinks too deeply. So you adapt, or rather, you learn to simulate adaptation. You become a master of camouflage, a social chameleon, blending in sometimes by dumbing down your vocabulary, simplifying your ideas, feigning interest in topics that bore you to your core, learning precisely when to speak, what to say, and, more importantly, when to remain silent, when to let the half-truth or the comfortable illusion pass unchallenged. Not because you want to, not because it feels authentic, but because experience, often harsh and unforgiving, has taught you that every time you laid your unvarnished truth on the altar of public opinion, you often paid a price. A price in raised eyebrows, in awkward silences, in invitations that never came, in opportunities quietly withdrawn. The price of being difficult, too much, or not a team player, but deep inside, beneath the carefully constructed facade, the weight accumulates. A quiet, persistent sadness, not the dramatic despair of a sudden loss, but the chronic, low-grade ache of unfulfilled potential for connection, of misunderstood intentions. A relentless hunger for meaning, for genuine engagement, for conversations that nourish rather than deplete. And always, the recurring, haunting question, whispered in the dead of night. Am I utterly, completely alone in feeling this way? Let the answer resonate with the force of an undeniable truth. You are not. Emphatically, unequivocally, you are not alone. There are others, scattered perhaps, often hidden just like you, but they exist. And more importantly, what you feel, that pervasive sense of silent suffering, of being an outsider in a world you perceive with such clarity, is not, I repeat, not proof of your weakness, your inadequacy, or some inherent character flaw. It is a signal, a powerful, undeniable signal of a rare and complex mind navigating a world that often prioritizes simplicity, conformity, and superficiality. A mind striving to maintain its integrity in an environment that often seems hostile to depth. And the philosopher we mentioned, Arthur Schopenhauer, with his characteristically unflinching gaze, saw this pattern with startling clarity centuries ago. He didn't just empathize with your potential pain from a distant historical vantage point. In a way, through his philosophical framework, he predicted it. He laid bare the mechanics of why this experience is almost an inevitable consequence for those who think and feel as deeply as you do. There exists an unwritten, yet fiercely enforced rule that governs much of human social interaction, a kind of societal operating system running in the background. Don't think too much, or at least don't show it. Don't question the collective script too loudly or too often. Don't deviate too far from the well-trodden path. Don't step out of line. The safety, they believe, lies in the center, in the crowd. Just echo what's popular. Repeat the prevailing narratives. Say what's safe, what's expected, what won't rock the boat. Nod in agreement with the loudest, most confident voice in the room, even if your internal compass screams in protest. This is the essence of what Schopenhauer and others observed as the herd mentality, the pervasive tendency of individuals within large groups to relinquish their independent critical thinking, to surrender their unique perspectives. Not necessarily because they are intellectually incapable or inherently malicious, but because on a deep, almost primal level, independent thinking is perceived as dangerous, carries risk. The risk of error, yes, but more terrifyingly, the risk of ostracization. And this is precisely why individuals who are truly, deeply intelligent are often subtly feared, resented, or pushed to the margins. Not because they are demonstrably smarter in a competitive academic sense, but because their very nature, their instinctive drive to question, to analyze, to seek authentic understanding, means they inherently refuse to blindly worship at the altar of the herd. They can't. It violates something fundamental within them. When one person in a group, comfortable in its shared assumptions, begins to earnestly ask, but why are we doing it this way? Or what if this belief isn't actually true? A ripple of unease spreads. When someone has the audacity to gently point out the contradictions, the unacknowledged compromises, the carefully ignored inconvenient truths, the collective organism often reacts defensively. It's not a logical response. It's deeply psychological. It's the immune system of the group mind trying to neutralize a perceived threat to its cohesion, to its comfortable equilibrium. Consider the dynamics. In every classroom, from kindergarten to university lecture halls. In every office, from the smallest startup to the largest corporation. In every community group, every social circle, even within families, there exists this subtle, pervasive pressure, conform or risk being cast out, fit in or face the chill of exclusion. And intelligent people, those driven by an insatiable curiosity and an unwavering commitment to what they perceive as truth, often find themselves, by their very nature, resisting this immense pressure. Not necessarily out of a deliberate desire for rebellion, though it can be misread as such. Often, it's simply because their minds are wired to probe, to explore, to seek coherence and authenticity, and the demand for blind conformity feels like a betrayal of their deepest self. But here's the uncomfortable, often unspoken, truth that Schopenhauer would have affirmed. Thinking differently, perceiving more deeply, is rarely admired in its raw, immediate form. It is far more often treated as a deviation, a problem, a threat. Because genuine intelligence doesn't just question abstract facts or solve technical puzzles. It inevitably questions comfort zones. It disrupts cherished illusions. It shines an unwelcome spotlight on everything people, individually and collectively, are desperately trying to ignore, to keep hidden in the shadows of unexamined beliefs and convenient narratives. Imagine this: you walk into a meeting, a social gathering, a family dinner, and you say something not aggressively but thoughtfully that inadvertently reveals the group's subtle hypocrisy on a particular issue. Or you propose an idea, innovative and well-reasoned, but it hasn't been pre-approved by the established consensus. It doesn't fit the current buzzwords. Or you gently, respectfully challenge the way things have always been done, suggesting a more logical, more ethical, or more efficient path. What is the common reaction? It's rarely applause for your courage or insight. More often, you are met with a wall of silence, a shifting of gazes, a subtle closing of ranks, and the labels begin to be affixed, whispered in corridors or implied in dismissive gestures. Weird, awkward, too intense, negative, not a team player, difficult. Let's dissect this phenomenon in the context of the modern workplace, an arena that ostensibly champions innovation and critical thinking. Organizations invest millions in consultants who preach out-of-the-box thinking. Mission statements are peppered with words like creativity, disruption, and vision. But what is the day-to-day reality for many who embody these qualities? The employee who raises uncomfortable ethical questions during a strategy session might be politely thanked, then find their contributions consistently overlooked in the future. The team member who persistently questions inefficient systems or outdated processes, offering viable alternatives, is often told to stop overthinking, focus on their core tasks, or be more positive. The individual who doesn't eagerly participate in superficial workplace gossip, who refrains from forced enthusiasm in mandatory fun events, or who prefers quiet, focused work over constant performative collaboration, is frequently branded as antisocial, not engaged, or lacking in soft skills. The system, while claiming to seek diamonds, often expends considerable energy polishing the pebbles until they all look reassuringly similar. In educational institutions, the pattern is often established early. Students who diligently follow instructions, memorize facts without question, and reproduce accepted theories are generally rewarded. They are good students. But the student who asks too many why questions, who challenges the textbook's narrative, who sees connections the curriculum doesn't acknowledge, or who proposes unconventional solutions, is often labeled disruptive, argumentative, or a daydreamer. Not necessarily because their inquiries are invalid or their intellect lacking. Often the opposite is true, but because they challenge the authority of the established structure, the comfort of the prepackaged lesson plan, the efficiency of a system designed for mass processing, not individual intellectual exploration. Even our modern digital forums, the internet, social media platforms, where the ideal of free thought and diverse expression is supposedly enshrined, often operate to punish complexity and reward conformity. Algorithms, by their very design, tend to favor simplicity, emotional reactivity, and the endless repetition of trending narratives. Virality is often achieved through easily digestible sound bites, confirmation bias, and outrage, not through nuanced discourse, intellectual humility, or deep, original thought. Thoughtful, complex arguments get lost in the noise. Provocateurs and purveyors of simplistic certainties often garner the largest followings. The digital town square, far from being a haven for the truly intelligent, can become another arena where they feel drowned out, misunderstood, or pressured to simplify their message to the point of distortion. So, what becomes of the truly intelligent, perceptive individual immersed in such a societal ecosystem? They learn, often through painful experience, to hide their light, to shrink their thoughts to fit the acceptable dimensions, to construct and wear an elaborate mask, a persona of agreeable normality, just to navigate daily life without constant friction, without constant invalidation. And eventually, society, in many ways, gets precisely what it implicitly, if not explicitly, demands: silent brilliance. Potential genius locked behind layers of social anxiety and learned self-censorship. Profound insights and innovative ideas that are never shared, never developed, because the environment was never truly receptive, never truly welcoming of their untamed form. Wisdom that remains unspoken, questions that remain unasked, truths that remain unacknowledged, because the risk of speaking them aloud feels too great. This is the ultimate tragic irony. The world proclaims its desire for intelligence, for solutions, for progress. But it often qualifies this desire implicitly. It wants the manageable kind of intelligence, the kind that plays nice, that doesn't upset the apple cart too vigorously, the kind that innovates within carefully prescribed boundaries, the kind that doesn't make too many people uncomfortable, that doesn't challenge fundamental power structures or deeply ingrained beliefs, the kind that fits neatly inside a pre-labeled, easily categorized box. But real, raw, untamed intelligence is rarely tidy. It is often messy, disruptive, and profoundly uncomfortable for those invested in the status quo. It does not fit neatly into slogans or sound bites. It does not particularly care about what's currently trending or politically expedient. It does not exist to flatter egos or reinforce biases. Its nature is to confront them, to dissect them, to hold them up to the light of reason and evidence. And that is precisely why society, in its current dominant mode, so often pushes it away, dampens it, or subtly coerces it into silence or conformity. To be truly intelligent in this deeper sense is often to be chronically misunderstood, to be perceived as a threat when your intention is merely to understand or to improve, to feel a profound sense of alienation while standing in a crowded room, listening to people nod in unison to assertions you recognize as hollow, incomplete, or demonstrably false. It's more than just rejection. It can feel like a form of slow, quiet social exile. Because when you can see through the unspoken rules of the game, when you recognize the artificiality of many social performances, you may find it increasingly difficult, even morally repugnant, to continue playing along with conviction. And when you cease to play the game by the accepted rules, you inevitably begin to lose your conventional place within its structure. You are no longer a predictable piece on the board. That is the immense, often invisible cost of nonconformity, of intellectual integrity. And for those rare individuals who refuse to betray the clarity of their own minds, who cannot bring themselves to unsee what they have seen or unknow what they have learned. It's a heavy price, one they silently, stoically pay every single day in countless small interactions and missed connections. But Schopenhauer, in his somber wisdom, believed that this very suffering, this profound sense of isolation, was not meaningless. It was not a sign of cosmic error or personal defect. He perceived intelligence not as a carefree privilege, a ticket to worldly success and happiness, but often as a profound burden, a heavy mantle that few were equipped with the inner strength to carry with grace and integrity. And those who do carry it, those who persist in their quest for truth and authenticity despite the alienation it may bring, must indeed walk a lonelier path, but, he might argue, also a more authentic, a more acutely conscious, and therefore, in a deeper sense, a truer one. Arthur Schopenhauer was not your typical drawing room philosopher, content to spin abstract theories that bore little resemblance to the lived realities of human suffering. He did not offer easy answers or sugarcoat the often harsh truths of existence. He did not promise inevitable happiness or a divinely ordained happy ending. His philosophy is famously or infamously imbued with a deep pessimism, rooted in his core belief that life itself, at its very essence, driven by an insatiable, blind will or striving, is fundamentally characterized by suffering, by want, by a ceaseless cycle of desire and fleeting, unsatisfactory fulfillment. And a crucial corollary to this belief was his conviction that the more conscious, the more intelligent, the more aware an individual is, the more acutely they perceive and experience this inherent suffering of the world and their own existence within it. Ignorance, in his view, could be a form of superficial bliss, a buffer against the sharper edges of reality. To many, this perspective sounds unutterably bleak, a philosophy of despair. But to those who have intimately known the quiet despair of thinking too much in a world that seems to reward superficiality, of feeling too deeply in a culture that often values emotional detachment or performative positivity, to those individuals, Schopenhauer's unflinching honesty can feel, paradoxically, like a profound relief, a validation, almost as if, after a lifetime of feeling like a discordant note in the symphony of society, someone finally acknowledged the inherent dissonance and explained its philosophical underpinnings. Someone finally told a truth that resonated with their deepest, most unarticulated experiences. Someone gave a name and a framework to their silent, misunderstood ache. And in that recognition, in that shared understanding across centuries, there can be a strange, quiet form of solace. A sense that, while the path may be lonely, you are not the first to walk it, nor will you be the last.